Warning, this video is a review of a game that contains graphic imagery such as body horror and dismemberment, in addition to harsh language. The game is rated M for mature, so this video should be considered the same. I have censors and warnings for the worst of it, but consider yourself duly warned. There may also be man nipples. Welcome back to another episode of Late Reviews, folks, and welcome to my new set. Now, you might be wondering, hey, you were just doing the Modern Warfare games. Why did you stop at 2? Why aren't you reviewing 3? Well, the answer to that would simply be that I learned my lesson. After the train wreck of Modern Warfare 2, I was curious to see how bad Modern Warfare 3 might get, but not curious enough to drop $40 on a game I'd be done with in 4 hours. Even during Steam sales, it only goes down to $20, and for that price I could catch 4 matinee shows of Ant-Man and I get double the entertainment value. So since I talked about sequels in my last video, that seemed like a decent excuse for me to take a look at other sequels to games I've previously reviewed. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Dead Space 2. Dead Harder! Roll the intro thing! There are a few reasons why I like to review games well after they've been released, which is why I call the show Late Reviews. The first being that I don't have a lot of money or free time, so I tend to be behind the trend when it comes to finally picking something up. The second reason being that I like to look at games when they have an established history, not just hype. For example, remember how everyone was so excited for Titanfall when it first came out, and now, over a year later, almost no one seems to talk about it anymore? That's why I try to avoid hype and take a look at games when everyone's calmed down about them. Today's title, Dead Space 2, had a big load of media buzz attached to it when it first came out, mostly of the not good variety, so I'd like to think I can give it a fair review now. Although it is hard to forget stuff as stupid as this.
It's everything you love in a game, and your mom's gonna hate it.
Why would they even make something like this?
Dead Space 2, rated M for mature.
So I picked up the first Dead Space during a Steam sale some years back. I had heard some mixed things about it, mostly positive, and I enjoy a good survival horror game now and then. You can check out my review for the full look, but the short of it is, it felt like someone tried to stitch System Shock 2 and Resident Evil together while watching Event Horizon and The Thing. That's not to say it was bad, it just borrowed too heavily from other well-known sources, so its original ideas were easy to overlook. Going into the sequel is a little difficult knowing its reputation. Electronic Arts really wanted this to be another big franchise, and adopted a rather unique marketing strategy.
Oh my god! Oh gosh. I think it'll make a person become insane.
I can kinda see what they were going for, with a message like, hey you guys, this game is so extreme with its gross, blood and guts that your frumpy old mom will just hate it. That's what makes it so awesome! Now, obviously I am no marketing expert, but why would you use such a juvenile marketing campaign? That seems like it would only work when your target audience is too young to know any better, which seems counterproductive when you're trying to sell an M-rated video game, which is difficult for younger consumers to purchase. Dudes, your mom will totally hate this, so make sure you put it on your Christmas list so your mom will buy it for you. Wait, what? Now, this isn't the first time Electronic Arts has made some questionable choices in their marketing campaigns. The company also got a lot of flack thanks to a contest for the then-upcoming Dante's Inferno called Sin to Win, which encouraged convention goers to sexually harass booth babes and con attendees. EA Games! Gross out your parents, molest your sister, buy our games! Hey, what's with this Worst Company of the Year award? On to the game itself, our story begins with a flashback to help remind us that, yes, Isaac Clarke does have a face, as revealed at the end of the last game, but now he talks as well. Clarke is now in some kind of mental institution, the kind where the doctors talk about things we already know, and have zero tact.
I believe you were telling me about your nightmares that you've been having. About your dead girlfriend.
Not even 3 minutes into the game, things start to go wrong. Isaac gets broken out of the hospital just as a new necromorph attack starts to infect the space station he finds himself on. We slowly learn that Isaac has been kept under confinement for 3 years as the government was using him to study the markers, alien monoliths that cause insanity and turn living people into undead monsters. Now with an outbreak in full swing, the government is trying to kill him to cover up the project, and the crazy marker-worshipping unitologist cult wants to capture him so he can help them make more markers. The gameplay is largely unchanged from the previous installment. Isaac still uses repurposed military weapons and industrial tools to shoot limbs off of necromorphs, his stasis module helps him solve puzzles and slow down enemies, and his kinetic module helps him throw things at enemies and solve more puzzles. Thankfully, they did away with most of the pull object with kinesis that you could easily just do with your hand gimmicks of the first game. The third-person combat can be clunky, but in a good way. It fits the survival horror theme the game is going for. There are some slight tweaks here and there, so overall it feels similar but better compared to the first. One complaint I have is that there's a surefire way to tell if an enemy is dead or not. Dead enemies always drop an item. This negates the game's jump scare gimmick of seemingly dead necromorphs that spring to life as soon as you get close. So if they don't drop an item, they're not dead, so keep shooting and or stomping until that sweet, sweet candy comes out. Speaking of which, the stomp attack is mostly a last resort method, but also the easiest way to open item crates. But for some reason, Isaac screams like a maniac when stomping on a monster corpse, and when stomping a box in a quiet supply closet. Most of the issues I actually have with the game come from the changes they made to the story and pacing. Isaac is now a vocal protagonist. More of a character than a player vessel this time, so the game seems way too obligated to have him react to the scary situations, when really it should be the player who reacts. It kinda kills the mood when something weird happens, Isaac responds, usually with a what the fuck, then everything resumes like nothing happened. It also makes the player feel like they have less agency in the story when Isaac makes bad decisions. For example, leaving Ellie, the first competent, non-insane character he meets, with Strauss, the escaped mental patient. Spoiler warning, it doesn't go well for her. There is more of an emphasis on story and characters this time, which is refreshing after the lackluster copy-paste story from Dead Space 1. While the first game took place on a ghost ship, which only had a couple of jerk support characters who made you do all the work, Dead Space 2 takes place on a space station, and unlike the Ishimura, Titan Station actually looks like a real place where people worked and lived. A good use of immersion in horror games to give the player an environment that seems like it was once normal and hospitable, and has now turned dangerous or mysterious. It also gives weight to the horror of fighting monsters that were, just a short time ago, normal people going about normal lives. Granted, normal lives in space, but still.
That sounds like something out of science fiction.
You live in a spaceship, dear.
So?
Unfortunately, this is also an area where the attempts to scare take a turn for the worse. While the first game had its fair share of gore and blood, what with a core component being dismemberment, Dead Space 2 is way too focused on guts and gore, and constantly shoving it in the player's face. Revulsion works well as a tool of horror, sure, but here it feels like a cheap gimmick to be used in the aforementioned marketing campaign. Two of the new enemy types are clearly necrotized children and babies, the latter of which are basically suicide bomber units. The screaming necrochild swarms aren't that frightening or even challenging after the first encounter. Just have the Ripper or Flamethrower equipped and it's just a wave of free loot drops. Ooh, piece of loot. Ooh, piece of loot. Ooh, piece of loot. Ooh, piece of loot.
I should not be having this reaction to being attacked by zombie children.
Even the tutorial is way too focused on throwing blood and gore in your face in the first 3 minutes. When it actually calms down and starts building the tension with the lack of monsters, it's pretty good. Sure, there are still plenty of jump scares in this section, but after the chaotic start, it almost feels like the game has earned a few of those. Speaking of which, I have mixed feelings about the Return to the Ishimura level. On one hand, it's one of the few levels that lets the spooky atmosphere take over for a while with a long break from combat. And revisiting the location of the first game mid-Viscera cleanup detail is more than a little amusing. On the other hand, it feels a bit lazy to just reuse a level from the first game for a whole chapter, and the pointless Whispers in the Halls space madness thing returns. And it's a little odd that they try to make the medical deck creepy again by putting everything under blacklight. Wow, there were a lot of masturbators here. Another scene I actually respect the game for is the Unitologist cryo storage room. The walls are lined with pods containing infected worshippers, requiring you to aim very carefully to avoid breaking them or shutting off the coolant and causing all hell to break out. In this case, literally. My favorite part of the game is the solar array chapter. It has interesting puzzles, like the one where you use a dead man's body to fool a DNA scanner, and a feeling of isolation while both the crazy AI and Director Tideman taunt you. Although it does raise the question of, if Tideman knew where you were, why didn't he just send a gunship to blow up the array? So as much as I'll praise the setting of the game, the story itself is pretty weak. The thrust of the story is that exposure to the marker is slowly driving Isaac insane again, only this time it's somehow lethal, because that's how dementia works. For most of the early game, Isaac is running from place to place to escape the EarthGov trying to kill him, but most of the time he's fighting and or running from the Necromorphs. Some characters pop up saying they can help cure him, but it turns out they're with the Crazy Pants religion that just wants to use him. Seeing what unitology does to people, especially when they see people going crazy from marker exposure, how could anyone think this religion was a good idea?
Alright, we've left subject Tom in the room with the marker for about 2 hours. Let's see how he's doing. Well, I think that's all the proof we need today. Good news, everyone! We found the one true religion. I'll start printing flyers and mixing Kool-Aid.
The unitologists are really unconvincing villains. They worship the markers make people crazy and turn them into necromorphs, I get that. But when faced with the truth of what these things do to people, they still try to kidnap Isaac to use him to make more markers? How does that even...
Wait a second. A cult that worships alien objects from outside of our world, and when they find out what they do to their fellow human beings, they embrace it willingly? Does that mean Dead Space is Lovecraftian horror in space? If that was intentional, well played, Visceral Games. Well played indeed.
Dead Space 2 tries to act like a survival horror game, but it leans way too hard in the direction of action games. Too often you find yourself trapped in rooms that won't open until all the enemies are dead, or you need to solve a puzzle to open the exit and you can't finish the puzzle until the room is cleared. A true survival horror game should give the player the option to just run away or escape from the fight when it's the more pragmatic option. This finally becomes an option in the last chapter of the game, but mostly because you're being pursued by an unkillable monster and your only options are to slow it down or run from it. Functionally, the game is fine. The controls are decent, the combat is quick and frenetic, which suits the mood, there are little to no load times except when you die, and the graphics are still decent, though some background art is very low resolution, and the physics can fuck up, even during cutscenes.
I might admire your persistence, Mr. Clark. But this is bigger than you and everyone on this station.
Speaking of which, the dialogue is so clunky and predictable, it makes you wonder why they spent so much money on voice actors for Isaac and company.
They're swarming in through a hole in the medical deck. At least you won't have to go through there.
Unexpected obstruction ahead. Shutting down. Welcome to the medical deck.
That gimmick stopped being funny in the first game.
Isaac, no! This is a really bad idea.
I'll stick around. I'm full of bad ideas.
Hey, stop trying to write the review for me.
Are you okay? You sound a little nervous.
Last time I was here, things didn't go so well.
I said cut it out!
I had some hopes we'd get more psychological horror out of this installment. It's established right at the beginning that Isaac is being driven insane by the marker. Unfortunately, the game makes it way too obvious that they're just hallucinations. These would work so much better if the game didn't tint everything red and throw in weird noises and static. If the player can tell something is wrong with the scene, it doesn't work. Except for maybe 1 or 2 jump scares that turn out to just be Isaac having flashbacks to the first game, these moments fall flat because we can tell they're not real and can't really hurt us, not counting the press E to not die hallucinations, which are just annoying QuickTime events combined with a startle, which I'd like to think we can all agree is not horror. So on the whole, Dead Space 2 has a lot of problems, and it's far from perfect. But I still want to give it a recommendation, because at the end of the day, I still enjoyed playing it. The main problem I had with the first Dead Space was it had some original ideas buried under ideas borrowed from better games and wrapped them up in old tropes and cliches. Dead Space 2's main problem is that it lacks the conviction to just take its good ideas and run with them. It has a very designed by committee feel to it, which seems very likely for a game from Electronic Arts. People seem to like action games, so let's put more action in this game. Oh, it's supposed to be a scary game? Well, let's make sure it has lots of gross and uncomfortable moments so it gets lots of attention. That makes it easier to advertise. At times it feels like the game is just going down a checklist of horror and action cliches. Scary hospital area? Check. Abandoned apartments? Check. Overrun mall? Check. Industrial area with pointless spinny blade traps? Check.
Spinny blade ball! Machiavellian.
Now, as to why I like the game, that's a little harder to pin down. The game's tone can be inconsistent, but when the action and jump scares balance out, it actually becomes a solid survival horror experience. Add to that the sci-fi elements, and it develops this unique flavor I can't say I've tasted very often, if you take my meaning.
Overall, as much as I will nitpick the game for its many flaws, it's still a solid enough experience that I didn't feel like I had wasted my time with it. For every over-the-top disaster movie moment, there are just as many moments where the game slips back into what it does well, tense survival horror with a good atmosphere. Dead Space 2 feels like it's trying to be taken very seriously, but you can't take a game with exploding babies and jabbering monsters with obvious glowing weak points seriously. It reminds me a lot of Knights of the Old Republic 2, another sequel riddled with problems, but when it worked well. Funny enough, you can trace the problems of both games back to Electronic Arts. Knights of the Old Republic 2 was rushed out before it was finished, so it was a buggy and incomplete mess, and Dead Space 2 feels like the original design and tone was meddled with to make it more marketable.
This trend would continue into the third and most ridiculous game of the series, but that's another game for another time. Until then, this has been Dax, and I'll see you later.
Whatever, baby!
Bart.
Wait a second. A cult that worships alien objects from outside of our world, and when they find out what they do to their fellow human beings, bring. There's one for the Blooper Reel. Blooper Reel. Can't even say the word right.
Alright, now we've left subject name Tom in the room with the marker for about 2 hours. Let's see how he's doing. I hate you, door. I hate you so much. Well, I think we can forget our lines. Yes, let's just forget our lines and move on.